Good evening. There's a story about a sociologist who went to visit with Andrew Carnegie, and the conversation started off polite and respectful, and they're talking about the different things that Carnegie does and how he invests his money. But very quickly, the sociologist starts berating, yelling at, railing against Carnegie, how it's such an injustice that he has all this money and he ought to do something with it. He ought to build something for the people, or give it away, or divide it up, or do something. It's just not right that he has all this money. So Carnegie sits there and he listens to the man. And when the man calms down and stops his yelling, he motions over to his secretary and she has her come here, and he starts whispering with her, asking, how many people are in this world? How much do I have? Like, if you added up all of my properties and my investments and everything that I owned, how much is it worth? And she starts giving him these answers and looking through his books, and he starts scribbling on a little notepad. And he sits there quietly as a sociologist, just looks at them confused as he scribbles away, doing math, trying to figure something out. And eventually he looks up from his notepad and looks at his secretary and says, cut him a check. 16 cents is what his share is worth. See, the thing is, we hear a lot about what is just, what is right, what is wrong in the world, about fairness. If you turn on the news, that's all you hear about is people talking about injustice or what is right or what they need to do. Problem is that so often, and I'll clarify, not always, but so often, the idea of justice is so foreign to both of the parties in this argument. And I believe that to be the case for the conversation between Carnegie and this sociologist. Tonight, I want to take a look at justice from a biblical idea. I want to see how good people consulted with God and stood up for the kind of justice that is the core quality of his existence. As a lot of you know, Terry and I have been doing this series on the good, the bad, and the ugly for the past couple weeks. And I can't speak for Terry, but I know that I found it easy to identify those who we'd characterize as bad. You know, people who did bad things for bad reasons. Bible is full of them, the world is full of them, they're easy to identify. And I didn't have too much trouble looking for somebody who was what we'd call ugly. Somebody who was on the right path at some point or had good intentions, but along the way started to do some bad things. That was pretty easy to find. That's how most people are at some point in their journey. What I did have trouble with was finding somebody who we'd call purely good. People are often ugly. Good people do bad things for bad reasons all the time. Because, well, they're people, they're human. It's what we do, unfortunately. So I decided to look into the Bible and try to find someone who did that, who we didn't know too much about. Someone we're only told about for the good thing they did. Instead of finding that, I found 5. In the book of Numbers, we read about a man named Zelophehad. Zelophehad didn't have any sons. Instead, he had 5 daughters. And in the laws of inheritance at this time, that meant that his land, his belongings, all that he had would go to some other family member. And if not them, it would go back to his tribe and not to his daughters. However, his daughters approached Moses and the leaders of the Israelites with a request that they should be allowed to inherit their father's land. So tonight I want to begin by reading about their situation and then walking through it just a little bit. In Numbers 27, the first 7 verses, we read, the daughters of Zelophehad, son of Hepher, the son of Gilead, the son of Machir, the son of Manasseh, belonged to the clans of Manasseh, son of Joseph. The names of his daughters were Mahlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah. They came forward and stood before Moses, Eleazar the priest, and the leaders of the whole assembly at the entrance to the tent of meeting, and said, our father who died in the wilderness, he was not among Korah's followers who banded together against the Lord, but he died for his own sin and left no sons. Why should our father's name disappear from his clan because he had no son? Give us property among our father's relatives. So Moses then brought their case before the Lord, and the Lord said to him, what Zelophehad's daughters are saying is right. You must certainly give them property as an inheritance among their father's relatives, and give their father's inheritance to them. This story, although brief, I think can teach us a few important lessons about pursuing justice, standing up for what is right, even when it's difficult. These women did just that. I can't imagine standing before Moses and the priests and the leaders was an easy thing to do, but they did it. They petitioned on their own behalf that they should be allowed to inherit their father's property, and they pressed their case until Moses took it to God for a ruling. And in the end, God agreed with them. He agreed with the daughters of Zelophehad, and he established a new law to ensure that their rights were protected. Tonight, I want to go over the lessons that we can apply to our own lives about pursuing justice, the lessons that we see in the actions from this short account. The first lesson that I think is obvious, at least it's obvious to me, is that when it comes to justice, when it comes to pursuing justice, we need to be bold. We see that the daughters of Zelophehad, they approached Moses and the leaders of the Israelites with a request. And I can't imagine how hard that would have been for them to do. I'm a person who, as many people know, I don't like confrontation. I don't like it. It makes me stressed. And these women, who were women in a time where women didn't have very many rights, as we're reading about, they decided that although it was going to be uncomfortable, although it was going to be unpopular, although it was going to be hard, they believed that for justice to prevail, they needed to do something about it, that they be allowed to inherit their father's land. So they spoke up. In Proverbs 31, verses 8 and 9, it says, "Open your mouth for the mute, for the rights of all who are destitute. Open your mouth, judge righteously, and defend the rights of the poor and the needy." We have this responsibility to use our voices, to speak out for those who can't speak for themselves, and to fight for the rights of those who are oppressed, those who are marginalized, those who society would normally neglect. And that can be hard. That can be difficult. That can be uncomfortable. That can be unpopular. That might lose us friends or family members or relatives, might hurt our social standing. And yet, justice, right and wrong, is a key component of who God is. And therefore, as we strive to imitate him in our lives, it should be a key component of our actions. In Isaiah chapter 1, verse 17, it says, "Learn to do right. Seek for justice, defend the oppressed, take up the cause of the fatherless, and plead the case of the widow." We are told to actively seek out justice, to actively defend those who are oppressed, actively advocate on those who are marginalized, and make sure their voice is heard. Justice is important to God. We can go through verse and verse and verse of the Old and the New Testament and see that God cares about the little guy. God cares about those who often can't speak up for themselves. God cares about the meek and the mild. And he wants to protect them. And as his agents here on earth, as these people who are trying to imitate who he is and what he believes in, it is also our job to do just that. Speaking up for justice is a key component of following Jesus. And we need to look at the teachings of the Bible. We need to look at the examples from Scripture to guide us in our efforts to fight against what we would call godly injustice and advocate for the rights of those who society, our culture, people would often neglect. We need to take action when it comes to justice. In James chapter 2, verses 14 and 17, it says, "What good is it, my brothers and sisters? Someone claims to have faith but has no deeds. Can such faith save them? Suppose a brother or sister is without clothes and daily food. One of you says to them, 'Go in peace, keep warm and well fed,' but does nothing about their physical needs. What good is it? In the same way, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead." It's all good and dandy to pursue justice hypothetically, to say that that is wrong, that should not happen, and to do nothing makes all of those thoughts, all of those beliefs that you have just as meaningless as not thinking them at all. In Matthew chapter 25, verse 40, it says, "The king will reply, 'Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me.'" Every action that we take to help others, every single one of them, is an act of service to Jesus himself. When we work to create a more just and equitable world, we are not only making a positive impact on the lives of those around us, which is important, but we are doing the work of God. We are doing the work of Christ. Throughout the Bible, we see that God is a God of justice, a God who cares and desires for his creation, and he wishes for us to help create a world that is fitting for that creation that he loves, a world that is fair and just and honest for everyone. In Isaiah chapter 61, verse 8, it says, "For I, the Lord, love justice. I hate robbery and wrongdoing. In my faithfulness, I will reward my people and make an everlasting covenant with them." God values justice. He hates injustice. And therefore, if we're to be his people, if we're to claim to be imitators of him, people who believe in him, people who get together 2-3 times a week and say that we are striving to be like him, then we need to care about the same things that he does. Another thing I realized when looking at the story of Zelophehad's daughters is that when it comes to justice, we need to be proactive. You see, the daughters of Zelophehad didn't wait around for justice to come to them. They didn't wait around and say, wow, this ruling, this law, it's really bad, it really hurts. Instead, they did something about it, and therefore we need to do something when it comes to our pursuit of justice. We can't wait around idly hoping that somebody else is going to fix the problems that we see in the world. We can't wait around thinking, wow, that is terrible. I sure hope somebody does something about that thing. Instead, if there is a need that we see, we need to be the ones to propose a solution. We need to be the ones to put in the work, put in the effort to make it happen. Because if we all waited around saying somebody else will get to it, somebody else will fix that problem, somebody else will head up that program, somebody else will feed those people, if we all waited around and said that, nothing would ever be accomplished. In Micah chapter 6, verse 8, it says, "He has told you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, to love kindness, to walk humbly with your God." Seeking justice is not just a nice idea, but it's a commandment. It's a law from God. He calls us to actively, proactively seek out opportunities to do good, to bring justice to those who are marginalized, to bring justice to those who are oppressed, to bring justice to those who are neglected. In Proverbs 16:12, it says, "Justice and judgment are the foundation of your throne. Steadfast love and faithfulness go before you." This verse here highlights the centrality of justice and fairness in the kingdom of God. It reminds us that these values must be at the forefront of our minds and of our actions. It reminds us that justice is not just about punishment for those who do wrong. It's just not about punishing the bad people of the world, but it's about imitating God's qualities and creating an earth that mimics the values that he holds close. And adherence to justice was a core value in the process of Jewish people inheriting land. In Deuteronomy chapter 16, verse 20, it says, "Justice, and only justice you shall follow, that you may live and inherit the land that the Lord your God is giving you." Here we see that following God's commandment for justice is not just a good way to live a life. It's not just a way to live a good and happy life, but it is also tied to our ability to inherit his blessings. It's our responsibility to be proactive. It's our responsibility to pursue justice. We must be actively working towards creating things that help those who are in need, because that's who God cares about. Those are the people who God calls. Third thing I learned is that when it comes to justice, no matter what you're doing, no matter how much you think you're in the right or how much you think that that thing is wrong, when it comes to justice, remember God. Remember, he's the one who defines what it means. The story of Zelophehad's daughters teaches us that the importance of seeking and following the guidance of God. You see, Moses, the priests, and the elders, they didn't make a judgment call. They didn't get together and talk about what seemed fair to them, what seemed right for them to do. They didn't make decisions on their own. Instead, they turned to God. They asked him what was right, what was fair, and what was just. And there are plenty of things about this life that I don't love. There are plenty of things about this world that I would love to change. but it's not my job to decide what is right and what is wrong. You hear people express their opinions about what is just or what is not just, what is right, what is wrong, what is fair and what is unfair, as if they have the absolute authority on deciding how things should be. But that's not our job. Thankfully, it's not our job. Our job is to turn to God. Our job is to pray. Our job is to study His Word and let Him decide what is worth the fight. In Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and 6, it says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your path straight." When Moses was unsure of how to handle the situation with these sisters, when Moses didn't know what to do, he didn't flip a coin. He didn't consult his friends. He sought the guidance from God. God led him and told him what to do to give the land back to these daughters. And when we're unsure of what to do, when we don't know what is right, what is wrong, what is worth fighting for, we don't need to consult our friends. We don't need to flip a coin. We don't need to do what feels right in the moment, in the passion, in the heat of things. We need to turn to God. We need to seek His guidance, His direction. And by seeking and following God's guidance and who He is and the characteristics that He presents throughout Scripture, we then can be sure that we are making decisions that align with His will for our lives, that align with His will for our world, that align with His values. In Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verses 1 through 3, it says, "For everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven. A time to be born, and a time to die. A time to plant, and a time to pluck up what is planted. A time to kill, and a time to heal. A time to break down, and a time to build up." This world we all inhabit, it's not ours. It doesn't belong to us. We didn't create it. Things happen for reasons that we may not like or maybe not even understand. But it's not our job to question God. It's not our job to make the decisions on how things should work. He is in control of these things. And we need to trust in His timing, in His plans for our lives and for the world that we live in. The book of Isaiah also underscores this idea, this importance of surrendering our own ideas of justice to God. In Isaiah 55, verses 8 and 9, it says, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than yours, and my thoughts than your thoughts." God, not us. God is the one with infinite wisdom. He is the one who understands how all of these things work. He is the one who knows what this plan is that we refer to all the time. We talk about God's plan. We don't know how that's going to work out. We don't know the inner turnings of every single thing that happens on this earth. We don't know why some things happen. He does. He knows. We need to remember that our understanding of justice, our understanding of fairness is limited because we are limited in our knowledge. And compared to Him, we don't know much of anything. In the book of Romans, it gives us this assurance that God's justice will ultimately triumph, even though we might not know what's going on, even though we don't understand the plan or why these things are happening or why it feels as if this situation is unjust. It reminds us that God's justice will win. In Romans 8, 20 and 21, it says, "For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of Him who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to corruption and obtain the freedom of the glory of children of God," despite the injustices we see in the world. Despite all the things that I want to change about the life that I live and the people I see, despite all of those things that I don't like, God's plan, His plan of justice, His plan of redemption, His plan of hope, will still be fulfilled regardless if I like what I see along the way or not. At the end of the day, He will emerge victorious. And as followers of Christ, as people who live this life, imitating the walk that He walked, trying our best to follow in His footsteps, it's important for us to trust in God's wisdom. It's important for us to look for His guidance in our pursuit of justice. We need to surrender our own ideas of what is right and what is wrong and trust that his divine plan for the world is just. And when we do see that, when we consult the scriptures, when we consult God in prayer, when we look into it and we do see these godly injustices, it's still our responsibility to consult him when we do pursue it and to give him the glory after it's finished. You see, the story of Zelophehad's daughters teaches us a lot. Teaches us the importance of standing up for what is right and fair. It teaches us about being persistent and the need to seek and follow God's guidance. Teaches us a lot, and these are all valuable lessons that can be applied to our own lives. But it's also a story about inheritance. It's a story about these 5 daughters knowing that they had something coming that was better, a promised land of their very own, and doing what they could in their own power to receive that inheritance. And like these sisters, the Bible teaches us that we too have an inheritance, that God has promised us a share in his kingdom, and that this inheritance is not limited by blood or familiar relationships, but it's open to everyone who truly knows him. In Colossians chapter 1, verses 13 and 14, it says, "He had delivered us from the domain of darkness and transferred us to the kingdom of his beloved Son, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins." And I remind us that this story is a story of inheritance for a few important reasons. One is that although we do have a duty, we do have a job to pursue and seek out and fight against injustices on this earth, we do that for a reason. We have an ultimate purpose, and that ultimate purpose is twofold. One is to ensure that we have an opportunity to accept this inheritance ourselves. And the other, which I would argue is equally, if not more important, is to make sure that we can share this promise of inheritance, share this opportunity with as many people as we can. You see, this is an inheritance that brings us out of darkness, that brings us into the light of God's love. And God, a pure, a just, a being so powerful that he formed the entire universe and all that sits within it, decided to act on his own behalf, to send his Son, someone without sin, a piece of himself, righteous and holy, a Lamb of God, to suffer, to die, to be beaten, tortured, ridiculed, mocked, and put to death, so that we have an opportunity to become one in his blood and to accept this inheritance, to give us freedom from the power of darkness. And this freedom is not something that we can earn. It's not something that we can achieve, but a gift that represents God's grace, a gift that is given to all of those who accept his promise. But the impact of this freedom extends far beyond our relationship with God. See, when we are transferred into the kingdom of Jesus, when we are buried with him through baptism, when we rise up out of that watery grave, we become someone new, someone whose sins have been forgiven, someone who is in God's family, someone who has a new identity, a new purpose. And in this new purpose, we are given free will still. And yet we're asked to use that free will, to use this new identity, to use this new purpose to live like God, to live like Jesus, to live a life characterized by love and joy and peace and the fruits of the Spirit and of justice and fairness, and one that represents who God is. And this inheritance is not just a theoretical promise. It's a reality that we can experience in our daily lives, every single day that we live this new life. And as followers of Christ, as followers of the one true God, we have been offered this new life with an incredible inheritance, an inheritance to a kingdom. And this inheritance is available to everyone who believes in him, those who accept his word, and those who are baptized into his Son. and it brings us into a right relationship with the Father. It transforms us. It gives us hope for a better future both on this earth and in the life to come. But it also gives us a responsibility to live like he lived, one that helps people both physically and spiritually. So tonight, I ask, if you have not lived your life in a way with this purpose, if you have not lived your new life and pursued the characteristics that matter to God, I ask you to begin that process of change. Or if you've never entered into this new covenantal agreement with God, if you've never been baptized in his Son, if you've never received the promise of this inheritance, this new life, this new purpose, I encourage you to make that change as well. Because I, like you, is here for the same reason. I am here for one reason only, and that is to live a life like Jesus, one that cares about both the physical and the spiritual needs of those people that God cares about. So whatever your needs are tonight, whether it be prayers, whether it be encouragement, whether it's a step towards being baptized into Christ, whether it's you just need somebody to talk to, a shoulder to lean on, someone to cry with. Whatever your needs are, I encourage you to come forward as we stand and sing together tonight. The fountain